Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I hope everyone is doing okay this morning. I've just uploaded the video with Professor Richard Wolff that I did last night. I added something to the beginning just to give a heads up on his profile because I don't necessarily want to shortchange his accomplishments. Great interview. That is probably going to be my first podcast that I'm going to place up once I get that stuff sorted out. So there's that. I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that was it ended up being a great interview. Richard Wolff was nice enough to accept my invitation. I wanted him to talk about the Swedish elections because I've heard people from the left talk about it, but I think they always underestimate the potency of an immigration argument that is not always about jobs. Sometimes it's about other stuff, but the left tends to only look at it through the lens of economics. Even though it's like, yes, you're right, that the state itself that's bringing these people in can afford to deal with these people if it wants to essentially raise the revenue necessary to do so and deal with the implementation, like the integration procedures that it takes them in. But if it doesn't do that, and you allow certain people to come into your country to settle in what's ghettos, and those people aren't able to work and aren't able to integrate themselves into the society, yeah, I think you have a problem. But Richard Wolff is right, though, that the issue here is not so much that you can't bring these people in or that immigration is a problem. The issue has more to do with whether or not the state is going to raise the proper revenue to deal with the people and integrate them in properly. Big shout out to him, though, and thank you for coming on to the show. I don't know if he's going to see this, but thank you very much for coming on to the show. So this video is going to be relatively quick because I wanted to be digestible, and I'm going to do my best to make this video relatively quick, even though there's several videos that I want to go through in the course of this video. I'm setting a goal at 20 minutes. That's my goal. Before I start this video, of course, as you all know, I'm trying to raise revenue because YouTube's got the channel. I'm sorry, I have to do this. This is undignified, I understand. But if you enjoy the content and you would like to support the content, please feel free to do so through either Patreon or you can do so through Streamlabs at the link at the bottom. It's a super chat alternative. And if you do, thank you very much. So, ILIB province. All eyes should be on ILIB province. I've been talking about this, and I'm going to talk about this probably every day until this issue resolves, if this issue resolves, because this is somewhat terrifying. And I don't necessarily think the level of terror is being propagated to the society in a way that I think it's necessary. 17 years ago today, or yesterday I should say, airplanes flew into towers. The Republican Party took a traumatized nation, and with that traumatized nation, essentially warped the mindset into a militaristic fist, leveraging the bravery of American troops and soldiers and the people who want to enlist, and leveraged that bravery in order to bash the Middle East and to transform the Middle East into something else. Now, the majority of the people, all but 4 people that were on those airplanes, were Saudis. And so we in this country did the most rational thing in the world with that information and punched a country that had nothing to do with it. George Bush fashioned this idea of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. George Bush did not know, or you could say knew, or at the very least, they cherry-picked information to give this impression that such was the case. And the lie was so expansive and big that the media didn't do due diligence, and not just didn't do due diligence, took the extra step in pushing the war with the help, or you could say pushing the war with the administration. I mean, you had ridiculous situations where Dick Cheney would give an anonymous source, and then Dick Cheney would go on a news show and quote the anonymous source, and because Dick Cheney was the anonymous source, And the key to being anonymous sources being anonymous, Dick Cheney gets away with it and makes it look as if Dick Cheney is quoting just what's in the newspaper. My point here is this. We are in the Middle East. We've been in the Middle East for these, 17 years. Killing, murdering, blowing stuff up, all on the pretense of a lie. Nobody was prosecuted for this. When Obama gets in office, he says, we're looking forward, we're not looking back. They killed 1 million people, and we're looking forward, we're not looking back. If I am busted with pot, I'm going to jail. He killed 1 million people. I don't understand how this is allowed to prosper, and yet it's allowed to prosper. And George Bush is allowed to sit there at a funeral of John McCain and with the press talking about these sweet nothings and these sweet moments between these people. These people are murderers. Murderers on an epic scale. Obama gets in office and not rolls this back, but expands it, going into 7 additional Muslim nations, bombing and killing. Hey, whether it's against the law or not, who cares? I'm the president of the United States, and we don't have an adversarial press to ask those type of questions. You know, they made this argument that Saddam Hussein was linked to bin Laden. There was no link. They were torturing people to try to create that link. Now, torture is against the law, and torture, particularly in this particular repugnant situation where they're literally trying to torture somebody to co-sign a mass murder. But again, no consequences. When the Republican Party made the decision that they were going to use this crisis to transform the Middle East, they were going to take down 7 countries in 5 years. Don't take my word for it. Take Wesley Clark's.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
That's the truth. I don't think he's lying. I don't know what reason he would have to lie about that. General Wesley Clark. Now, this is known. Like, this is not one of those situations where nobody knows this. That was on Democracy Now! This wasn't on some, stuffed in some conspiracy theory website. This is General Wesley Clark telling you what was told to him by people or somebody that he served under. This is amazing fucking information. And yet the band plays on. And that's exactly what they've done. Don't take my word for it. Looking at it with your own eyes. Is that what he just said? Is that what has taken place? Whether Democratic or Republican administrations, they have assiduously stuck to this particular plan. And now you have Donald Trump in there with the same thing. The catch here is, though, they hit their head on a rock. That rock being Syria. Now, they thought because they went through Iraq that they were going to be able to go through the Middle East and that Russia wasn't going to get involved. They believed that because they put in Boris Yeltsin, who was a drunkard, and they were able to destroy that country was going to stay destroyed indefinitely. Vladimir Putin was not necessarily on board for that. And whatever you want to think of him, whether you want to say he's a bad guy, whatever else, he seems to be ferociously pro-Russian. My point is this. They hit their head on Syria. The United States invested tons of resources into the destabilization of that country. Now, you can say it was the White Helmets. You can say it was other groups, terrorist groups that were in that region. Both of those things are true. Western powers invested resources into terrorists. Don't take my word for it. Tulsi Gabbard says the exact same thing when she confronts Jake Tapper with this news saying we're paying terrorists and the people in Syria are asking us, why are you supporting these terrorists? They're raping and killing and pillaging. Why are you supporting these terrorists? This is not me saying it. This is known. This is known. I'm asking you, when somebody says your country is supporting terrorists and destabilizing another country, how does that make you feel? What does that make you think when somebody says that? Especially when it's true. Especially when it's true. I'm just trying to get this point across to you that our actions in the world has not necessarily been for the good. Especially in events going after 9/11, and I would argue going far before 9/11. We tried to take down multiple nations. Do you believe that the slave trades in Libya is a positive thing? And do you believe that that should be replicated in Syria? I guarantee you, when you talk to the people who are living in Syria, even if they are against Bashar al-Assad, they are not for the terrorists that we in the West are supporting. That is a clear point that you need to understand and need to comprehend. This is not, yes, Assad is a good guy. It's more so, no, the terrorists are not to be favored. We are on the side of terrorists. That's the point I'm trying to get across to you. This is not even debated at this point. We call them freedom fighters. We call them rebels. At the end of the day, they are terrorists who are trying to take down their government, and they have not been working to the best ends of the people of Syria. Russia and Iran has assisted in propping up the government of Bashar al-Assad. If it wasn't for that, that government might have, well, collapsed. They've been able to take back the territory. Now, in taking back that territory, there have been what's been called chemical weapon strikes. Here's the catch. This has been completely blamed on Bashar al-Assad, even though even the New York Times has published stories saying that the terrorists themselves have access to chemical weapons themselves. Interestingly enough, when Donald Trump gets in office, there's a chemical weapon strike. Donald Trump attacks. He doesn't wait for an investigation. He attacks. He fires missiles at Syria. They don't have evidence. He fired missiles at Syria. There's another chemical weapon strike, supposedly. There's a bunch of stuff on social media. Listen to this. This is Tulsi Gabbard questioning General Mattis about Syria, about one of the weapon strikes. Listen to this conversation. Now, the fact is, the United States is in another country. The United States is in another country legally, by our own laws, by international laws. Syria has not invited the United States to be in Syria. The United States has invited itself. That is illegal. You're instigating yourself into another country uninvited. Russia and Iran have been welcomed into that country, and like any other country, any country can welcome another country into its borders or request help. I'm trying to get a point across. We are there illegally. We are not on the side of the angels. We are there illegally. We, caused the problem by destroying the country in Iraq. In destroying that country in Iraq, we destroy that government, sending a bunch of people without jobs and in horrendous situations into various countries, essentially destroying any notion of a border between Iraq and Syria, and having a bunch of guys with long beards and mean intentions essentially roaming about. In this level of destabilization, we supported certain groups that we thought would take down certain governments, Syria being one of these governments. Listen to this. This is Tulsi Gabbard. And she's asking him a point. And I'm trying to make a point here. We're there illegally. That's my point. I am not the only one who has hit their head on that point. Tulsi Gabbard has also hit her head on that point. And she's questioning Mattis about A, it's illegal to be there, and B, What are you using as your justification for these strikes, seeing as based on our Constitution, they are against the law?
Thank you, gentlemen, for your service. The President has indicated recently his intention to launch U.S. military attacks against Syria. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the sole power to declare war. Congress has not done so against the Syrian government. Section 3 of the War Powers Resolution requires the President to consult with Congress before introducing U.S. armed forces into situations of hostilities. Section 2 of the War Powers Resolution clarifies the constitutional powers of the President as Commander-in-Chief in Article 2, which you referenced, Secretary Mattis, to introduce forces into hostilities only pursuant to 1, a declaration of war, 2, specific statutory authorization, or 3, a national emergency created by an attack upon the U.S., its territories, possessions, or armed forces. Syria has not declared war against the U.S. or threatened the U.S. The launch of 59 missiles against Syria by Trump last year was illegal and did not meet any of those criteria in the War Powers Resolution.
That's a flat fact. That's a flat fact. As a human being looking at what took place with the missiles that Trump launched, Syria did not declare war against us. Syria has not threatened us or our interests. Now, you can take Orwellian terms and say that Saudi Arabia is somehow in our interests, and because Saudi Arabia is somehow in our interests, the very existence of Syria is somehow a threat. But that gets in Orwellian terms. I'm talking about human beings looking at a situation and giving their appraisal on it. What she just said was absolutely true. What she said was true. Why doesn't the media know that? Like, why doesn't Chuck Todd know that? Why doesn't Chuck Todd look at that and say, wait a minute, this looks massively illegal. How are we doing this? Why doesn't Jake Tapper and this fact check team come out and say the same thing? Wait a minute, this looks massively illegal. Why are you doing this? In fact, Jake Tapper had her on, and the only thing Jake Tapper could reflexively do was recant the government's position. Essentially, transcriber.
The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2018, which was signed into law by President Trump, states that none of the funds made available by this act may be used with respect to Syria in contravention of the War Powers Resolution, including for the introduction of U.S. armed military forces into hostilities in Syria or launching U.S. military attacks against Syria.
Congresswoman, we have not yet made any decision to launch military attacks into Syria. I think that when you look back at President Obama sending the U.S. troops into Syria, at the time he did, he also had to deal with this type of situation because we were going after a named terrorist group that was not actually named in the AUMF that put them in. This is a complex area, I'll be the first to admit.
It is simple, however.
It's not complex. It's not complex. The word that he's using, complex, is a euphemism for illegal. It's illegal, but we don't want to call it illegal, so we use the term complex. We are in another country illegally, and we've been giving resources to terrorists. Don't take my word for it. I've shown multiple articles showing that investigation shows that the capabilities of ISIS was greatly enhanced by the weapons that they were getting. And they weren't getting these weapons, or it far exceeded what they would have gotten purely off the battlefield. I want to give you this very clear impression on what is taking place over there from a standpoint of what the position that your government has been taking. Recently, John Bolton came out and said this. Oh, by the way, the OPCW, Donald Trump launched those missiles and attacked Syria. The OPCW comes out and says there's no chemical weapon strike here. We've attacked them without having any evidence of a chemical weapon strike having taken place. We are in a country illegally. We are attacking them without even showing that the attacks that they're talking about have been taking place. And we've used this as a pretext to create a condition by which we can attack. Essentially putting out a red line saying, if X takes place, we will do Y. And it is an automated response, meaning that if such a thing takes place, we will automatically assume that it's Bashar al-Assad, and we will use this as a justification by which to attack Syria. Forget the fact that we're in the country illegally. And forget the fact that the OPCW has completely gutted the claim that the Syrian government was responsible for a chemical weapons attack. Look, there's more to this, but my time limit is running nigh. This is John Bolton. John Bolton is a maniac. John Bolton is a maniac that whispers in Trump's ear. All of these people who believe that Donald Trump is this kind of anti-war, whatever he may be, this maniac is whispering in his ear. Listen to what he's saying about chemical weapon strikes that may potentially come up. Nikki Haley, psychic, has already said, if such a thing takes place, we will attack. Now, listen to John Bolton, this maniac.
Is that if there's a third use of chemical weapons, the response will be much stronger. And I can say we've been in consultation with the British and the French, who joined us in the second strike, and they also agree that another use of chemical weapons will result in a much stronger response.
Now, I've just shown you that the OPCW has said that the chemical weapon strike didn't take place, the one that they're talking about. The one prior, they didn't have any evidence for. Mattis himself even comes out and says, we're still looking for evidence for that chemical weapon strike. And it still didn't stop Donald Trump from attacking them in that scenario. In both of these cases, they didn't have evidence. And yet, they were still attacking Syria. And he is still framing his argument with this idea that we can attack if a chemical weapon strike takes place. Now, Russia looks at this and said, this is nonsense. You're making this up. And because you're making this up, if you attack Bashar al-Assad's government, we will attack you back. Understand what's being said here. The United States has already killed Russian troops. Hundreds of Russians were killed in Syria. Our actions in that country has already killed Russian troops. So again, I know I keep nailing this because I kind of want to make sure this is clear to whoever watching this video. We are in a country illegally by our own laws and by international laws. Iran and Russia have been invited into that country and they are the legal whatever relationship in that country. We are not. There are about 10,000 terrorists, based on what the UN is saying, that we are protecting. We are protecting terrorists. That should, hurt a little bit in your throat when you say it, but it's absolutely true. And not just we're protecting terrorists, we are threatening another government, saying that if a chemical weapon strike takes place with all of these terrorists nearby, we will have proper pretext to attack. Forgetting the fact that the last few chemical strikes that they say took place, one, Mathis didn't have any evidence for, he admitted. And the last one, what the OPCW looked at, wasn't even a chemical weapon strike. Right now, two nuclear powers are not agreeing on reality. The United States is saying something is taking place. Russia is saying it is not taking place. In fact, between the two, it seems that the United States is in the wrong. The United States, like I showed you with Wesley Clark, had a plan of getting rid of multiple governments in the Middle East. It hit its head on Syria, not realizing that Russia was going to intervene in the situation to prop up the Syrian government. The catch becomes ILIB. If ILIB falls, then what the United States has wanted to do fails. If ILIB stands, then it doesn't. The reason why there's all of this hysteria surrounding ILIB has to do with the plans of what Wesley Clark has just said. This idea of whether we're going to be able to reshape the Middle East in the image of the United States, or in the image that the United States wants to get out of the countries that are not already within this domain of influence, eventually getting around to taking down Iran. ILIB falling is the destruction of that plan. The hysteria that's taken place over ILIB is not about humanitarian issues. It has everything to do with whether or not the plan is going to go forward to take down the multiple nations, ending with Iran. That's the point I'm making. It took me 24 minutes to make it, a little long-winded, but that's the point. There's more to this, but the overarching game plan of this is this idea of reshaping the Middle East, you could say in the image of the West. And the fact that Russia intervened in this, whether it was expected or not, I think the United States believed it was a unipolar power. And you've come into this sphere or this domain where that's not true anymore. China is doing military exercises with Russia. Do you think China is doing military exercises with Russia for shits and giggles, or do you think they're doing it because they want to get across this idea that any conflict will involve both of us? And it's not going to just be China, it's going to be multiple nations. You've broken the world in half almost, where you have Western powers and powers that are not necessarily in alignment with the West. I don't know where Turkey falls in this, but what you have are Western powers versus, this other, whether you want to call them the new axis or neo axis. One last point. We're over. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not micro-military. There's a historian. I can't think of the gentleman's name. I love his work. And he, in many of his works, in many of his books, he talks about, I think he calls it micro-military engagements. In our case, we've been engaged in the Middle East for 17 years. Obama, when he came in, Obama didn't get us involved in any large-scale conflict from the standpoint of, 100,000 troops per se. He was somewhat of a manager of militarism. I don't know what's going to take place from the standpoint of Syria and what they've got in mind. What I do know is that the only people in that country, in ILIB right now, with those terrorists, have any sense to either fake or make some kind of chemical weapon strike would be the terrorists. And Russia is saying that the terrorists are planning to do a chemical weapon strike. Russia is saying they're either going to fake it or they're going to use chlorine in order to do it, in order to precipitate a strike by Western powers. Now, this makes all the sense in the world if you're a group of terrorists and you want to try to instigate Western powers to come into the fray because you yourself know you're going to lose and your world is coming apart. By the same token, if you're the Brits or the Americans and you want to get involved in this conflict, you want them to do this, which is why if you're Nikki Haley, you're screaming at the top of your lungs, if there's a chemical weapon strike, we'll get involved. If there's a chemical weapon strike, we'll get involved. Wink, 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 wink. That's what's going on. If you're looking for an overall plan, the fear of this, and the thing that freaks me out about this, is you're talking about nuclear power nations. And this is a level of brinksmanship that is breathtaking. I don't know if the media is paying complete attention to this, but the narratives that are taking place here are in opposition to one another, so much so that one country says we have pretext to attack on humanitarian grounds, and the other country says you're making this shit up. All eyes need to be on that. That's the point of this video. And by the way, talking about the chemical weapon strikes, listen to Lawrence Wilkerson, and I'll end it on this.
Now, are these false flag operations, Larry? Help us decipher what is going on here. I don't know who to believe.
Sharmini, neither do I. I suspect this is a game of tit for tat. If you can accuse me of using chemical weapons, then I...
Just so we're clear, this is Lawrence Wilkerson. Lawrence Wilkerson used to work for Colin Powell. He was just like, what's the word for it? He was his former chief of staff for Colin Powell. I like this guy. I don't know if I would have liked him while he was in office. While he was working for staff. I've seen hours of Wilkerson. I like this guy. It seems like he's changed based upon his interaction with the students and the people that he's worked with. And I guess he's come to a certain political arc. He's going to talk about the false flags, and he's also going to talk about the accusations of chemical weapon strikes against Bashar al-Assad. Like I said, the OPCW came back and said that the last one was bunk. General Mathis himself says he was still looking for evidence for the prior one before that. So we have this situation where the last few chemical weapon strikes, they have no evidence for. And yet they're still saying, if such takes place. while also knowing that the terrorists themselves have access to chemical weapons. You can understand the problem here. A, reality, that's the first point, meaning what's real. And B, regardless of what's real, the fact that two nuclear powers are in direct opposition from what counts as reality is troubling, to say the least. Wilkerson, being, you can say, in this culture to some degree, they went to him to see if he could give some insight on what's taking place and why these guys are throwing these accusations back and forth. They accuse the United States of using white phosphorus. This stuff burns through people's skin. It burns them alive. It's vicious, and it's not allowed from the standpoint of military. Russia accused the United States of using it. The United States has said they weren't using it. This would also act to some degree as a war crime in a similar way of using chemical weapons. Tit for tat. You kill my dog, I kick your cat. Let's take a listen to what he's saying about it as explanation.
I can accuse you. As a military professional, I'm very, very familiar with the effects of and the use of white phosphorus. I can't imagine why U.S. forces, particularly F-15s, would be dropping white phosphorus on anything. It's very inefficient. It's not very useful. It is forbidden, as far as I understand, by international law, especially against targets that feature humans. So I can't imagine that this isn't just a tit for tat. Assad and the Russians or whatever saying the Americans are doing it because we're postulating almost daily, John Bolton in particular, the national security advisor, that Assad is going to use chemical weapons and we're going to have to react.
I'm going to have to just break this video up because this video has gone far longer than I wanted. You must understand, media is part of war. Media is an element of warfare. In fact, at this point in our day and age, media is vitally important to war. How do you know what takes place across the world? How do you know? How do you know? Most people get their information from social media. How do you know? How do you know that your world is not being crafted and shaped? How do you know what the source of that information is, or for that matter, what's even taking place? That big video where they took down Assad's Saddam Hussein statue and they, draped the flag. They put millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to give that particular effect to the people who are looking at that particular event, thinking that event was homegrown. The same thing happens in the United States from the standpoint of people with massive amounts of money astroturfing political movements, making those movements, especially on the right, seem like they are real movements and people were really involved in the process. FreedomWorks or Freedom Foundation, FreedomWorks, I believe is what it's called, is one of them. Let him finish, because he's going further into this. He's going to get into whether or not he believes Assad used chemical weapons at all.
The latest thing I've seen from Israel Times and from Fox News reporting on the Wall Street Journal is that he's going to use chlorine gas, which I find preposterous. It's a World War I chemical and not very effective and might as well kill your troops if the wind shifts.
This is amazing. Like, why didn't the media go to him when this came out? And understand what I'm asking here. You have a military guy who says, look, this sounds utterly preposterous. I mean, I've been in the military situations. I've been doing this for years. I don't know why anybody would ever use this. This goes all the way back to World War I. This seems completely preposterous. That's amazing! Do you realize that in the media for the last X number of days, they've been saying Assad is going to release chemical weapons. Assad is going to release chemical weapons. If any chemical weapons release is going to be Assad. If any chemical weapon release is going to be Assad. They've stuck to this story, even introducing a little bit more saying it's going to be chlorine. We've seen the orders. Not just they are going to do it, meaning they haven't even done it yet, but we've seen the orders. Our intelligence is so intuitive that we know that Assad is going to do it. He's already given the order. What reason would he have to do this? Nobody in their right mind. He is such a bad guy that even something that is beyond the capability or beyond the need militarily, he's just going to do it for shits and giggles. Wilkerson is saying, I find this utterly preposterous that anybody would do this. Let's let him finish. I love this.
as well as it would kill enemy troops.
And in terms of Bolton, and of course, President Trump has gotten in on this as well, tweeting about what Assad might have coming. If he
The neoconservative agenda. Syria was to be next, Iran after that, following Iraq, of course, the invasion in 2003, which went so haywire that they were unable to follow up quickly with Syria. Well, now we're back to Syria, but we were back to it with a president who is very reluctant to use major U.S. forces, Barack Obama, of course. So we are looking, the neoconservatives, John Bolton amongst them, we're looking for an opportunity to re-engage with Syria, particularly now that Russia and Iran, our principal target here, have gotten so entrenched with Assad's forces. So this is it, looking for every excuse, any excuse, all excuses to reopen U.S. operations, major U.S. operations against Assad in Syria, always realizing that the ultimate target is Tehran.
Larry,
Right there. Right there. Like, that's honest. That's honest political commentary. Whereas, damn it, man. Like, the aggravating part to this is you hear that, and a normal person hears that. A regular, normal person hears that. And they say, yeah, that sounds right. That's what we've been doing around the globe. Is that what you want your country doing? Is that what you want your country doing? Yeah. I understand people were here. All right. Look, I do this video because I want people to be very clear on what's taking place around the globe. That Russia has already said, if you attack, we will do in kind. We have already killed Russians, not to mention we are in that country illegally. Whatever you want to think of Vladimir Putin, whatever you want to think of Assad, whatever you want to think of those countries, whatever you want to think of Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, you can think they were the worst people in the world. How much money have you spent deposing them? You don't have health care. You don't have roads. I mean, your roads are falling apart. Your bridges are falling apart. Your country is going to ruin. How much did it cost to depose him? You've killed 1 million people in order to get rid of Saddam Hussein. That's not even including the exodus and the refugees that have flown from one country to the next. We've been in those countries for 17 years, murdering and killing. Even if you think they're bad guys, that's not our responsibility. If we're propping up dictators, then yeah, we're causing problems. And we've been causing problems in the Middle East because we've been propping up dictators and strongmen in that part of the world. It's one thing if we had nothing to do with anything, just hands off. But that's not how we've been taking things in the Middle East. Not only have we been propping up dictators, we've been taking those guys out. My point in this is, regardless of what you think of the people who are running those countries, it is not our responsibility to take down governments. Nor do I want to spend $20 trillion or $15 trillion or $8 trillion, how much money ever it costs, to do it. Is this what you want your military doing? And do you believe that that money could have been spent in better ways, more so from the standpoint of internally to the country itself? I don't care if Bashar al-Assad is a bad guy. It is up for the people of that country to take Bashar al-Assad out. I don't care if Gaddafi is a bad guy. It is not up to the United States to take Gaddafi out, and vice versa. It is one thing if you're going to have a large number of people being murdered. Fair enough. But the fact is, you can't make the argument that we're going to go and do a lot of murdering because our murdering is somehow better than the murdering of somebody else. It's nonsense. Nonsense. If what you're going to do is more harm, then leave it. That's my policy. That's the way I look at it. It's not completely non-interventionist, but you can't make the argument that what we've been doing around the globe, especially from the standpoint in the Middle East, has been for the betterment of the Middle East. We've killed 1 million people. I don't care if Saddam Hussein was a bad guy. I don't care if Bashar al-Assad is a bad guy. I don't care if Vladimir Putin is a bad guy. My point is, that is not for us to dictate what takes place in that region of the world. Nor do I want to invest the money, my own tax dollars, to do so. The brinksmanship that is taking place in ILIB now could start a world war. That's the point I'm getting at. That's why I'm continuously pointing to ILIB when I'm doing these videos. So I'll leave this here because at this point I'm just going to be droning on about the same thing. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon or through Streamlabs. Any donation through Streamlabs, I'll show it up in big as a power check. Alright guys, thanks. Y'all have a good one.